Thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you, Daron.
Thank you again, Jyoti, for inviting us to join. It's a really interesting topic, very, very relevant topic. So I'm going to dive straight in. Hopefully everyone can see my slides. So very, very briefly, I want to run through the agenda. And like you mentioned, Jyoti, there's a lot of new tactics being used today by attackers that extend beyond ransomware. And these tactics have significant implications for CISOs and CISO teams. And what you'll find out in the next 10 to 15 minutes is some of these implications really require a drastically new approach to protecting data and protecting your most valuable data. So we'll set the scene and talk about some of those trends. And I'll explain why InfoSec leaders are placing such emphasis on their storage systems and backup systems, and what's happened in recent weeks and months and years even. Why CISOs are paying such attention on their storage systems, and also the implications for you. I want to make sure this webinar is really, really practical and be able to arm you with some practical steps and recommendations to help you enhance the security of your most valuable data. So that's in a nutshell. Let me, one second. All right. Let me move on to the next slide. Okay, let me set some context. So what we've seen over the past year is a lot more sophisticated attacks. Threat actors are now starting to exploit vulnerabilities in storage systems and backup systems. And if you think about it, it's not surprising why, right? They realize that this is the single biggest determining factor to show if a company will pay the ransom. And not surprising, considering that storage systems and backup systems are core IT infrastructure that retain all of an organization's data. And over the past few years, we've seen that security innovation for storage and data protection remains fairly low, especially for solutions aimed at the larger enterprise. And it was under the assumption that they are far too deep in the data center core to reach, far too obscure to pose a meaningful attack surface. And that's really why security teams haven't really thought too much about adding that extra level of protection around the storage infrastructure and backup infrastructure. Unfortunately, this assumption has now been proven wrong by cyber criminals. And so what you'll find out over the next 10 minutes or so is why it's so critical for CISOs to close that gap. I'm not going to spend too much time giving some examples, but with all the news around data storage hacks, ransomware attacks, of course, and immutable storage arrays, we're seeing that cyber protected storage is really getting a lot more attention. And you'll find out that it's going to become a lot more important throughout the remainder of 2021 and into 2022. One example would be Eversource. They're a Fortune 500 company, energy company. Back in April, a few months ago, they suffered a data breach that exposed the personal information of around 11,000 customers. And that was due to a misconfiguration within their storage environment. And whether it's cloud or on-premise, we're seeing time and time again these issues arise. So let's go back to explaining the role of storage security. I think the best way of looking at this is understanding the comparison. If a hacker gets control of a desktop, then the damage is fairly minimal. But when a hacker gets control of the storage systems or perhaps the storage management systems, then suddenly it's a different ballgame altogether. Suddenly, those attackers have access to all of the data. I'm talking about backup, copies, recovery copies, production data, everything. And that means they can delete that data, they can encrypt the data, and they can even sell the data. So again, it's really not surprising that protecting storage is now considered one of the most important layers of defense against ransomware, as well as other types of attacks. And so while storage is certainly one of the most critical areas for your team, what we've seen when we speak to CISOs and their team is that there isn't a huge amount of insight and knowledge about what needs to be done, even understanding who's at risk and some of the vulnerabilities that are available. And many cases we hear time and time again of CISOs talking about data encryption and believing that data encryption is enough to protect them. Well, data encryption is of course important, but data encryption will not prevent attackers from hacking into your storage systems or storage management systems. And if attacker gets in, well, once inside, the attackers may delete petabytes of data volumes, whether they're encrypted or not. They can corrupt them, they can make them inaccessible, and do a lot more damage. I think the best analogy is a bit like putting your most valuable jewelry in a safe. Of course, that's important, but if the safe is not attached to the wall, or if there's a big hole in the back of the safe, well, guess what? The attacker can walk into your house, pick up the safe and walk out. And that's a fairly simplistic example, but I think it's a good way of looking at it. And there are a number of ways that attackers can get into your storage systems. I'm not going to go through all of the list, but I'll think of a couple that spring to mind. One is that you have insecure user management and authentication, right? Simple matter of incorrect and insecure configuration can allow attackers to take full control over your storage device and up to and including exfiltration and even destruction of the data and its copies. That's one example. And we actually ran a survey fairly recently to analyze the most frequent vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. And it's shocking to see that organizations are still using the same login credentials and factory credentials. They haven't changed it. And it sounds obvious that this is something that we would do, but it's still an issue that organizations, both medium and large organizations, are faced with today. Another example that springs to mind of a way that an attacker could get in and access a storage system is the use of vulnerable protocols and even protocol settings. Attackers can use such configuration mistakes to retrieve configuration information and store data, and in many cases can also tamper with the data itself, including the copies. So a couple of examples of how accessible the storage systems are to attackers. And I mentioned some examples of customers and prospects that we speak to, and this is an issue. And unfortunately, CISOs are realizing, especially in the last 6 months, are realizing that this is an area they need to focus on. You can see two examples of banks. Of course, it's not restricted to banks. Many industries like energy and utilities and pharmaceuticals, etc., are realizing that now's the time where they need to place greater emphasis on their storage systems and their backup systems. And realizing they need to build a strategy or scale their vulnerability management or vulnerability assessment solutions that they have today to their storage management and backup. And so as we wrap up, I want to leave you with some practical steps and recommendations, and perhaps some questions you need to ask of your teams or your storage teams. Firstly, I would recommend evaluating existing security processes to determine if they cover storage infrastructure to a good enough degree. And some questions that come to mind that may help you clarify the level of maturity of your storage security planning are, do your security policies cover specific storage networking, and backup risks? Another question could be, are you evaluating storage infrastructure security on an ongoing basis, not just on a one-off ad hoc basis, but leveraging automation to always scan and analyze risks and misconfigurations on an ongoing basis in real time or near real time? And then finally, do you have detailed plans and procedures for recovery from a successful attack on a storage system or a backup system? And if you do you test such procedures? Just a few questions that you could ask your team today. So you can see in front of you a few recommendations. Build a plan to address the knowledge gaps for storage security. That goes without saying. Number two is improve your security program to address those gaps. And I can't emphasize enough how automation is a critical component of your security strategy, but using automation to continually evaluate and prioritize risks. And so I want to leave you with a really, really important resource called the Security Guidelines for Storage Infrastructure by Nist. Our CTO, Doron Pinchas, was actually the co-author of the Nist guide. It's a really, really invaluable asset. It was launched end of last year, and I encourage everyone to check it out. You can go to our website and find out more Again, this arms you with everything you need to know about the risks, the implications, as well as providing you with some really, really practical recommendations.
Next up, I'm going to invite Stacey Watson, Senior Territory Sales Manager, ComSec Global. With over 16 years of experience in cybersecurity industry, Stacey has developed a value-driven, outcomes-based consultative approach to security engagements, enabling her to connect technology and services with organization needs. Stacey is responsible for leading sales ComSec global portfolio throughout the UK, Ireland, USA, and Canada. I would now request, yes, hi Stacey, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to hand this over to you now.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay, first of all? Well, I hope
Yes,
you can. So, yeah, thank you. So, just want to thank you, first of all, for allowing me to take part today in this webinar. It's a very exciting topic and one that I think everybody is now taking extra note of moving forwards. So I just want to start by introducing myself. So as I said, I'm Stacey Watson. I'm the Global Sales Manager for ComSec Global. Can everybody see my screen? Yes. So just to give a little bit of background about ComSec. So ComSec are the Europe's longest standing cybersecurity consulting company with over 32 years experience. Now, we want to try and ensure that we are defending our customers' critical IT assets and ensuring that they are adhering to certain compliancy and just making sure that we can make sure that they are as secure as they can be. So we are actually based out of Tel Aviv. Our head office is in Tel Aviv. We also have a couple of offices, European offices within Amsterdam and London. Now, just to show you just a quick snapshot of some of the leading organisations that we partner or have worked with or are currently still working with, you'll see based over quite a lot of verticals. And we've also been able, by having this mass range of clients, to understand the current situation and cyber challenges clients like yourselves are facing. So business continuity and digital availability have become extremely important. I mean, it's always been important, but since the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really now forcing our work, our skills, even our social lives to go online. So as a result, DDoS attacks themselves have grown significantly. In fact, they've probably doubled. So there's now twice as many DDoS attacks in Q1 of 2021 than there was in 2020. So web-facing critical businesses, they need to make sure that their assets are protected at all times. If they're not, this is going to have a significant impact on the revenue growth of the businesses. And of course, it comes down to the chief executives, the CISOs, whose jobs it is to make sure these businesses are secure. Now, with that said, we're all facing a situation today that these attacks are also becoming increasingly more sophisticated. They're always trying to target the web-facing assets. Now, to defend and mitigate such risks requires expert knowledge, time, resources, which many organizations don't have. Again, it's a well-known fact that there is a major shortage of cyber professionals worldwide. I think it was last reported by Gartner that the shortage is around 3 million, and that gap is growing. So, you know, we need to take this into consideration. Web-facing critical assets being unavailable for simply one day will have a huge impact on the continuity of those businesses and indeed the revenues of these businesses. So we all have policies that we need to adhere to and comply to, audit requirements. And what we're looking to show today is validating and proving that the measures you have implemented are actually working and they are actually protecting your business. Now, all of the above I just mentioned, you know, they kind of create the kind of perfect cyber storm for most CIOs, CISOs. You know, and each day, you know, they have to ask themselves a couple of questions. You know, how do I keep up with this ever-changing landscape? How do I comply with all the policies to ensure that we've got this business continuity? You know, and ultimately, where can we find the resources and time to test the policies that we have in place are actually working and that our web-facing assets and infrastructure is safe? Now, I know that'll be recognisable for many of the people listening here today. And, you know, this is one of the challenges that ComSec have identified. You know, we've been in the cyber industry for over 35 years. We've been working together with our customers to create a unique platform, a unique SaaS platform, a validation platform to understand and give extra assurance that the measures that you have got in place at the moment are working. And this platform is DStorm. So the DStorm SaaS solution will give your businesses a competitive edge and security validation that you need and that you should be looking for. It will elevate your team's knowledge and leverage, you know, sorry, I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. Oh, so it'll give you the competitive edge and the security validation that you're looking for, elevating your team's knowledge, and it will give you access to some more out-of-the-box, sophisticated attack scenarios, which some preventative measures that you could be using will miss these out. So different types of attack known as volumetric, infrastructure and applicative attacks. With DStorm, it's allowing you to automate your validation testing processes. The scenarios are customized to make sure that they are fitting to your specific needs. And it would reduce your team's project times by approximately 60 to even 80%, saving you a lot of time and a lot of money. So I want to put this into perspective by just telling you, you know, an example, or showing you an example of where we have used this for a customer of ours. So we were approached by a successful startup business. I think now, because security is so prevalent in the market, people will take measures to ensure they're ticking the boxes. So we mentioned there in Doron's presentation about the Nist guidelines. So there are guidelines out there, and there are so many off-the-shelf packages that you can purchase as defensive measures. But how many of us are actually checking that they work? We're paying for a service that, you know, we hope will work, but, you know, have we proven it? And this is where we are different, and this is what we want to promote moving forward. We should be testing that that what we've got in place is working. So back to the client, like I said, so they approached us and said, we have this measure in place. It is an off-the-shelf package, but we would like you to simulate an attack to make sure that it is working. So that's what we did. We launched a volumetric and infrastructure layer attack. We recommended to launch the application-based attacks So that's what we did. Now, after a very short period of time, the system went down. The system went down because we found out later that the protection was not enabled. So without this test, you know, we're kind of going on trust that the measures that you thought were secure are not. So we approached the vendor at the time to make sure that now the protection is enabled. It was verified, it is now enabled. So we launched the attack again. Again, after a short period of time, the service went down. So what we then realized was that the paid services were only protecting the client against volume attacks. So with the DSTOM and the attacks that we can simulate, we're obviously using so many different attack scenarios that are not covered by these out-of-the-box packages. So, you know, having good defense measures in place is, of course, a necessity. However, having the correct implementation and multi-layered advanced attacks will always, that will always be looking to bypass these defenses. Just, you know, as the saying goes, you better to be safe than sorry. So with the unique DSTOM testing and validation platform, protecting those web-facing assets, building this into your annual test cycles will not only save time, save money, it will improve your safety. It will deliver you the validation and the mitigation of your business continuity cycle. And, you know, it's easy for me to say, but it's a must. You know, it's a must in every business today. You know, vulnerabilities, attacks are changing. They're changing all the time. And we want to make sure that we can help you to mitigate those risks. So, you know, securing your organization and making sure, you know, we can keep our businesses a safer place.
Shay, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you now, and we're gonna have your presentation up.
Great. Can you see my screen now?
And see your screen now.
Can you?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. So thank you, Jyoti, for the invitation, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon, this evening. It depends wherever you are. A few words about Howden. Howden is a global insurance broker based out of London. We are currently operating in 42 countries around the world and have presence in most places around the world. We have close to 9,000 employees, and we're active in many types of insurance. I'm leading, my role is the global head of cyber for the group. So in days where COVID is not around, I travel around these little dots here. Right now, I'm still based in our head office. What I'm going to try and give you in the next 10 minutes available to me is a little taste of what cyber insurance is all about. I'm not sure that all of you are familiar with the product. It is relatively a product that has been around for quite a while. I started doing cyber insurance 25 years ago, but still there are not a lot of organizations globally that have bought the policy. A lot of them are still in the process. One of the things that we did see in the middle of 2019 and 2020, when COVID started, is the big uptake in the policy. I think that people started understanding as COVID hit us that a lot of people moved home and basically into what we call non-protected areas, taking their laptops or using the desktops at homes. Hackers started understanding that the RDP and remote Desktop protocols are very easy to access, mainly when other people are using the computers. And we've seen a huge uptake also in the amount of claims that we were seeing, which we didn't see before, which is two things that happened at the same time. And a lot of people are now asking to buy cyber insurance, understanding that really the protecting your intangible property or the non-invisible assets that you have is something that must be done. As I mentioned before, the attacks on clients globally started in the middle of 2019, but they weren't as sophisticated, and the frequency and severity of those claims or those attacks were not what we saw in 2020. In 2020, we saw the severity, the complication, the sophistication of the cyber attacks, mainly the ransomware attacks, go way up. We saw the, as you can see from the numbers here, the average ransomware go up over 200%, and it was no longer in a Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoins, it was in the millions. The biggest ransomware we paid as a broker last year was around $16 million, but the industry paid much more. And one of the things that we've seen when I talk about the sophistication is not just encryption of your data, or it is what we call a double ransomware. It's on one side encrypting your data, on the other side taking crucial data out from your systems and using it to extort you, which means that even if your backups are clean and you want to bring them up and you say it will take you maybe a day or 2 days to bring the backups up, you're still left with the data out, which leaves you no option but to pay the ransomware. I think to put it into perspective, cyber risks, and to you, I think as CISOs, it's not really new, but to many of our clients, this is it's quite new, are now one of the 3 top risks facing every business around the world. As you can see, this is a chart done by Allianz. Allianz is a big global financial and insurer, and they do this chart on a yearly basis. Cyber, by the way, in 2020 was #1. This year it is supply chain, and I think we all understand, looking at Microsoft and the latest attacks that we've had, SolarWinds, that really supply chain is becoming one of the biggest headaches for you and for clients around the world. Pandemic, of course, entered #2 in cyber, but I think that #1 and #3 pretty much put the picture in place that those risks must be protected. For those of you who don't really know what cyber insurance is, well, it doesn't come instead of enhancing your cybersecurity. Actually, if your cybersecurity or cyber hygiene is not high enough today, you will probably not be able to get insurance. And as Doron and Stacey mentioned, the protections like storage automation, DDoS, MFA, SIMSOC, all of these things are almost becoming the technology threshold for people to get cyber insurance. The policy covers 3 areas. First of all, the first party is those damages that can happen to your companies emanating from a cyber event. It can be anything from extortions, and as we said, data deletion, data extraction, denial of service attack, anything that can cause damage to your company is covered under the first party part of the policy. The second one is the third party, which you know from other types of insurance, and that's basically any claims coming against the company from people that see themselves damaged by the cyber event. Can be regulators, can be suppliers, can be customers, and those people can claim against the company. But I think the most important part of cyber insurance, and that's the uniqueness of cyber insurance, is basically, as an insurance industry, we have realized that time is of essence when there is a cyber event, and we have created panels technical panels and legal panels and PR panels to basically assist our clients manage the cyber event. And as we know, claims do happen, even if you have spent quite a lot of effort in protecting and money in protecting your assets. Still, we have social engineering and 0-day, and we only need to open the newspaper on a daily basis and see that companies are being attacked. So I think the most important thing is really understanding that cyber is here to stay with us, and cyber insurance is another balance sheet protection. It doesn't come instead of doing everything that you're doing on a daily basis, and truthfully, we are not really competing on your budget as such, but rather enhancing your ability to deal with an event when it comes, which means that you will have incident response teams, anything from the Mandiants of the world and the CrowdStrikes of the world and the KPMG and the ComSecs of the world, and everybody and anybody that can help you work and get your company back up and running as soon as possible. I'd like to say a few words about the insurance industry. What we're seeing in the last 6 months is really insurance companies really cherry picking those clients that have invested heavily in their cybersecurity, and those companies which have not invested enough in their cybersecurity will probably, even if they choose to pay a very high premium, will not be able to get any cover. The demand for cyber insurance, as I said, is increasing, and the claims are growing, and insurers are now really choosing those clients that they wish. So if you want to get cyber insurance, you really need to show the insurance industry that you are spending and investing quite a lot of time in enhancing your cyber hygiene. The underwriting process takes into consideration, and that's a part of apart from the questionnaires and all the questions that the insurer will ask you before onboarding you and giving you a limit of liability or giving you the policy. They will ask a lot of questions around your cybersecurity, anything starting with how you educate your employees, what kind of technology you deploy. And there is a direct linkage, I think, and that's the importance of really understanding why protecting your company and doing everything around cybersecurity is important. There is a direct linkage between your ability to get insurance, the price you will pay for the insurance, or the deductible or the limits of liability you will be able to buy from the insurance industry, with the way that you handle your cybersecurity. And these are the type of things that you will need to demonstrate to the insurers, and of course all these devices. If I can give you, one of my 2 cents before I hand it over back to Jyoti again, is that really things like MFA, phishing training for your employees, how do you deal with your end-of-life systems, segregation between systems. EDRs are becoming now almost a must for every company. Backup segregation, storage automation, DDoS mitigation, SIEM/SOC, all these things are things that can definitely assist you when you're buying the policy and can reduce the cost of the insurance policy. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to have questions from the audience.
Super. Thank you so much. I am going to request Doron and Stacey to come on screen as well. We have about 15 minutes to ask the questions. So I'm going to jump straight into that, and I'm going to start first from Doron. Okay, Anil, so let's keep it full screen. Let only the speakers be there on the screen right now. Okay. Okay, so while I'm asking these questions, others can even post other questions if they like. Okay. So Siddesh is asking me, Doron, this one's for you. Keeping backup storage offline and encrypted, is it a good approach or not?
Yeah, it's an important question. I think the best way of understanding that is that you have offline backups, immutable copies, air-gap vaults. They're important components in an overall approach, overall strategy. But you'll still need to harden the production storage systems and the data volumes and the management plane of storage and backup. And the reality is that organizations use a mix of technologies for data and data copies, including storage arrays, and storage replication, snapshots, etc., etc. So ensuring each of these is secure is really, really critical, and in many cases, it's not particularly straightforward.
You have replied individually as well to most of these questions, but for the benefit of the others, I just wanted to ask them out loud as well. The other question is, my company is planning for a NAS and a ransomware audit. So can these two audits be planned simultaneously or should be dealt separately?
In theory, it can. So you can simultaneously audit NAS, security in general, and also ransomware protection as well. Ransomware protection specifically on your storage arrays. That being said, you really need to ensure that the audit does a good enough job, a thorough enough job of scanning your storage arrays. In my experience, that hasn't really been the case. So it may be worth looking into two separate audits. So in theory, no, the answer to the question, in theory, yes, it's possible. But from my experience, there are a lot of gaps in place, and ransomware is very, very broad audit, and it may just touch the surface of your storage systems, but not do a thorough enough job of doing it. So you may want to look into doing two separate audits.
The next one's for Stacey. Stacey, Vinod Menon is asking you, Stacey, the simulation attack that you did, was that a part of BAPT or a different type of test?
No, that particular example wasn't part of a vulnerability assessment. But we would always recommend that you still stick to your usual penetration test schedule. But this is specifically targeted on validating your DDoS protection.
Okay. So Shay, the next one is for you, and this is a little specific, so you can either answer on this forum or probably connect with Vinod separately. But this one says, Shay, what kind of premium are we looking at approximately for small to medium industries?
Yeah, so this is, as you mentioned, this is quite a difficult one. When we underwrite the policy, we underwrite it based on many criteria. It's not just the cybersecurity, but there is definitely a difference between when we onboard a health institution rather than a lawyer's office or an accountant, and the risks are different. We take many things into consideration, but to give you a really very broad idea, we're looking at about 1 to 2.5% of the limit of liability. So anything, anything to do with $10,000 for $1 million to $25,000 to a premium to $1 million would be just a general idea of what the policy premium would be.
Super. I think that's a good enough answer, and I think that gives a ballpark as well. The next question is also for you, Shay. What would be covered as a part of cyber insurance? I think you covered that a little bit in this answer. How about eligibility for cyber insurance? Do you check the security posture of the company as an eligibility?
Yeah, so we don't actually send somebody over to do an on-site assessment, off-site assessment, because this is obviously too costly and intrusive. We try and keep it at questionnaires and asking information through your insurance brokers or insurance advisors. We ask a lot of technical questions around your cyber hygiene and making sure that you're eligible to buy the insurance. Sometimes we deploy some kinds of technology to do non-intrusive assessment to see from the outside what the company looks like. And as I said, I think that if a client can demonstrate that really he has been doing everything to make sure that his cyber hygiene is high, and he's using all the right things, and he's using all the right protection measures, and he will be able to get the insurance, and probably at a reasonable price and a reasonable limit of liability.
Follow-up question again for you. What is the acceptable level of hygiene for an organization to get insured? Is there like a standard to follow?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my last slides, I think we are becoming, there is almost a threshold of technology today that insurance companies are looking to see. If a year ago it was enough to have just a firewall and updated intrusion detections and anti-malware software, today we're talking about MFA, we're talking about EDRs, we're talking about connection to SIMSOC. They really would like to see your backup hygienes. How do you back up your storage, automate? Where do you keep your crown jewels? How do you protect your crown jewels? Segregations of systems if you have an IT and OT, and these are the things that probably if you can show that you do all these things, you will be able to get the insurance cover.
Doron, the next question is for you. What are the compensating controls to mitigate from ransomware attack?
Well, it's a big deal. Attackers that have access to a storage system could do a huge amount of damage. You were talking about deleting petabytes of data, encrypting petabytes of data. It's making data volumes inaccessible or corrupt. It's I don't want to talk too doom and gloom, but it's a very, very serious issue. Again, I use the kind of example of comparing an attacker getting access to let's say an endpoint or a network. You know, these are manageable. There are enough solutions in the market that protect organizations. But the storage, we're talking about a significant amount of data. I think the best way of looking at it is, one storage device is equivalent to around 200, 300 servers. So that kind of gives you an idea of the severity of access to the data. And a single storage array serves hundreds of database and application servers. And so, in a nutshell, a compromised storage system would cripple at least dozens of business services and applications.
Now you speak about the dangers of it. So Ernest Debrew is asking, what are the best practices for data and storage risk management against ransomware malware? Is there like a standard that you follow? Is there like a policy that, or something that you benchmark it against?
Yeah, well, it's a couple of things. Firstly, the Nist guide. I mean, Nist really is the go-to authority when it comes to storage security. There aren't a flood of different guidelines, and Nist, when they launched it end of last year, the storage security guideline is really, really comprehensive, and it talks at length around both the risks and also what to do about it. And so my recommendation is check out the Nist guide. That's the first thing. Yeah, best practices, of course, every storage vendor from Dell EMC to Hitachi and everything in between, they have their own guidelines and best practices. And of course, aligning with those best practices is critical as well. So it's not, it's not black and white, it's not simple, but the Nist guide is a great kind of go-to resource to get started.
Super. Stacey, my next question is for you. I already have DDoS protection. Why should I use DStorm?
Yeah, so I covered this a little earlier. So many of the packages that people are currently using for DDoS protection are off-the-shelf products, and they're there for a defensive mechanism, but they only cover the most basic of attacks. So the DStorm platform is there to ensure and validate and audit that the protection that you've got in place is actually working, and to mitigate the risk that these attacks could make the businesses go down and get you offline. So it's more an offensive tactic to validate what you have is working and correct.
Okay, so now the next question is not in particular directed to anyone, but Donovan Batusta is asking, how do you see the evolution of SOC, of SOC in the coming years? Are we going to see AI-based solution in terms of infrastructure security? Would this mean lesser manpower needed since security monitoring can be automated?
Well, I think a SIM SOC or a useful SOC, if done well, is something that will probably be a must for every insured going forward. I think as we progress in time, we will have to see that the amounts of alerts that are coming out of the systems are not too many to handle, and that they are coming in a way that they can be handled by sometimes right now it's a very highly intensive manpower, a lot of analysts sitting, but I think that as we progress we will probably have much better technology in order to deal with this, because everybody and anybody will need to have somebody, the same as we have an alarm system connected to security when we leave our offices or home, so somebody can monitor us when we're away from home over the weekend. SIMSOC will be part of this as well.
Who negotiates the cybersecurity contract from the organization side when most managers are not very knowledgeable in technology? So, yeah.
That's a great question, you know, because we engage with the technical people. We engage with the CISOs, with CIOs, and they are not the decision makers as to buy the policy. But we have to come together with them, because if the process starts from the CEO or the CFO or somebody or the risk manager and then goes down to the CISO, it's not done right, because the CISO or the IT department has to be highly involved in the process. It is a very, very technical product. Maybe the CFO can answer 3 or 4 questions, but 30 questions out of the 34 needs to be engagement with the CISOs, and that's why we engage with them in the very initial stages. And I think that if it's done right, the likelihood that the board or the management will approve it is much higher when the CISO is involved.
Do you also, accept small clients, less than 10 employees as your clients? I mean, probably the people who have more assets on the cloud. Do you have such clients?
Yeah, we have clients from one-man show to big conglomerates that have thousands and tens of thousands of employees and anything in the middle, and we even have private people buy it for their home.
Oh, super. Okay, so this is going to be my last question. Then we're going to wrap up. How do you make sure your cloud provider is using adequate protection against ransomware when you are just using software as a service?
For me?
Doron, do you want to take this up?
Yeah, it's well, the question depends on the provider itself, right? there's an argument between whether data is more secure in the cloud or on-premise, and it's not a simple answer. There's an argument to both. But there's also a responsibility shift as well of who really owns the data that's stored in the cloud. Is it the particular person or the company, or is it the cloud provider? Is it the AWS, the Azures? So putting the same processes in place, which I discussed, being able to ensure you can scan on an ongoing basis, being able to detect issues, security risks, will in many cases be down to the company. There's lots of variables, and it's not a 1 minute answer, but the company should be responsible for the security of the data that's stored there. And it's at a high level, it is a shared responsibility between the organization and the cloud provider.
Okay, super. So guys, this is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for sharing so many questions. I'm going to be sharing these with the organizers, and I would like to thank everybody for joining us today, and a special thanks to Doron and team and Continuity Software for taking this initiative and hosting this topic with CISO Mag. You can write to us on this email address. We've made a note of your questions and your opinions in the poll as well. And we're definitely going to be using this to better serve you and to collaborate with Continuity Software in the future as well. Thank you everybody for your time. Good day and good evening, everybody who's logged in today. Thank you so much, everyone.